Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be talking about movement in Unity, within Unity, and we're going to be using that package that we had downloaded in class. And that basically has everything that you're going to need for this particular assignment. And the point of this video is I want to introduce to you how you can achieve movement, and then later videos we'll talk about how you would write your own scripts to make these behaviors happen. Um, in the previous video that we had, we talked about adding rigid bodies and colliders, and they do two different things. Rigid bodies allow objects to they can take in physical forces like acceleration, force, gravity, and then that can be used to make things move. And the other thing was colliders, which create a boundary for types of objects. And today we're going to be talking about how you can incorporate different types of scripts that add different types of behaviors. And the way that we are implementing it in these examples is that each object that is going to be moving is going to have number one, some type of input, either the player pushing certain buttons or some type of instigator that tells an enemy to be moving around a certain way. And then there's a separate script that actually tells the object to move, which is actually referring to the rigid body and then applying a certain force to it to make it move around. I'm going to go to some specificities about each type of character in both the top-down situation and the side view situation, so you can pick and choose how you want to implement this in a future project or in a different assignment, but understanding which ones are appropriate is the point of this lesson. Cool. The way that we're going to get to these objects or this example scene is go to Unity project window, assets, examples, movement example scene. Lastly, the last thing that we want to talk about is I covered rigid body 2D, collider 2D, the input script, movement script, and then we're going to touch briefly about the parameters. And these parameters are values that you can change inside the inspector for each of these objects that might affect the way that this player or the enemy moves, the speed that they move, how many jumps they have, how far the another object has to be before they start engaging and attacking or moving towards it, and then how many waypoints maybe an enemy object might move to do its sort of patrol thing. Okay, so first thing that we're going to look at is the player movement portion, and then we're going to talk about the enemy movement portion. And there's a copy of this script and each component that I'm going to touch on in Canvas, so you can refer to this while you're watching the video. So let's dive into it. Let's going to go into Unity, and I'm going to pull up that scene that I talked about. So go to Assets, Examples, Movement Playground. Movement example. And so I'm going to change my layout so it's going to be default, and I'll show you how to navigate to how I had it just then. So I want to hit this triangle so I can expand upon what objects are in the hierarchy so I can see each individual object. And what I'm going to do here too is I'm going to pull the game tab away from behind the scene tab so that they split this window right here. I want to be able to see both in the game view and in the scene view. A tool that we've talked about before is using the hand tool, so we can navigate about the scene, and you can go, this is the first tool on the left side. You can also hit Q to activate that particular tool. Also, on a Windows machine or a Mac, you can hold down Option or Alt on a Windows machine, and then you can also do the same thing. So just click and drag, and that's going to scoot you around the scene. Great. So according to my script, I want to look at the player movement point and click, and that's going to have two main components that we're going to focus on: the player point and click controller, and then the top-down point motor. This is essentially the input portion of it. So this allows you to decide, the script in here is written so that it's going to take in the right mouse click to allow your player to move around. And then after you click on it, it's going to tell the motor to move that player around. So the motor, all of these motor scripts are basically telling the rigid body to move in a certain direction. So if we look at it in action, we'll go to Unity, hit play, and I'm going to just select the point and click object in the hierarchy right here. And you can see right now it's kind of out of my view. Um, for some reason, the camera is linked to the bank object. Just go and select the bank object and move it so that we are, so we can move this camera to a different spot. Let's see, where is the bank? Cool. So I double clicked on it and those move arrows appeared. I'm just going to slide it over here so I can see this in the game view. Now, I want to focus on the point and click object, so I'll just go and click point and click, and all of the nitty gritty, all of the details about this object are in the inspector portion. And we always want to look at the inspector because that tells us what components are attached to it. Of course, the transform is there, the spread render is there, rigid body 2D, circle collider, and these two components that I mentioned before, player point and click controller and top-down motor. You'll notice that the player point and click doesn't have any parameters that we can change because basically that's just taking in the right mouse click. And so if I go here and I click on it, it's going to move. If at first it didn't move on the first click, make sure that you always select inside the game view so that Unity knows that you're going to be giving it some type of input. So when I click, this point and click controller is looking to see where my mouse is in the game space and telling the player object to move to that spot. And it's directing the motor to move at a certain speed. Right now, the move speed is at 10. Of course, you can change that to a bigger or smaller number, and you'll notice that it's gonna move slower. That's pretty straightforward, right? Cool. Now let's go to the next object. And the next object that we want to look at is the rotator object. This takes a player input controller and uses the top-down rotator motor. So if you wanted to duplicate any of these objects, you want to make sure that you have these matching components to it. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But this has a different motor than the top-down point motor. This one has the rotator motor. So it's interpreting some input that we give there to do a different thing. Rather than just making the object move in a certain direction, it's going to rotate when we press the side arrows. Clicking back into the game window, I'm going to hit left, and you'll notice that this rotator object here starts to rotate when I press left. And when I press right, it rotates again. When I press backwards, it moves backwards. When I press forwards, it's moving in the upward direction. If I rotate this way, then it's going to move in whatever it thinks is up in relation to itself. What are some parameters that we can have? If we select the rotate object here, let's see, the top-down rotator, you'll notice that there's some parameters here. Move speed is 10 like it was before. We can slow that down if we want. Or the rotate speed. So if you feel like it's not rotating fast enough when you press left or right, you can change that value. Great. Next one that we want to look at is the top-down. Let me move my bank object over here. I want to focus on this top-down object here. And let's select it here, top-down movement. And its most relevant scripts for this lesson is the input controller. It's the same input controller that we did for the rotator, but in this case, it's telling the top-down motor to just move in the directions relative to what you're pressing. So when I press down, it's just going down. When I press left or right or up, then it's just moving in those directions. Pretty straightforward. If I change this value to something really big, or 3 times bigger, then you'll notice it does move quicker than that. Great. What are some other things that we want to look at? Let's go to platformer. So platformer is a little bit, it's further to the right of the scene. So let's just scoot over, let's scoot the bank object over to this way. And you'll notice that the blue Discord character right there is the platformer. I'm going to select it here, platformer movement, and there's actually 3 components to this object. It has the platform, the player input controller, which takes in the keyboard controls, platform, platform movement, and then the jump motor. So the platform movement allows it to move left and right, and the jump motor allows it to jump. So we need all three of these components attached to our object to make that all work. So if we go back to Unity, you'll notice that there's an input controller here, and some of these might be a little bit out of order. You can always drag these and pull them into the order that you want. So player input controller, platform movement. Platform movement, of course, is going to be the speed of us moving left and right. I just slowed it down a bunch, so it's going to move relatively slow. If I select it again, looking at the inspector, the last one that we haven't looked at yet is the jump motor. And jump motor allows us to determine certain things like jump height. Right now it's set to 4. When I jump, let's not bump our heads. Let's go like that. Cool. If I lower this, lessen this value, the jump height is smaller. I can change the gravity scale so that when it goes up, it experiences a different rate of gravity. So if I'm going up, let's say that I wanted to float up pretty quickly and then fall down faster. My fall gravity scale is 3 times as high as my regular gravity scale. Let's change this to maybe something really big. So I'm going to jump up fairly slow, but then I'm going to fall really fast. And this is really up to you to decide how you want your player to feel when they're jumping. Do you want to have multiple jumps? Here's the number of jumps that you can have. So you jump, 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 jump. Secondary jump height. You can change the secondary jump height to something bigger. Let's say right now the regular jump height is 2. So if I have the secondary jump height to 5, there you go. And of course, this value can have a decimal number, and it's free for you to change. I'm going to talk about these ground detection options in a second. So our player is using some basic jump mechanics. And right now, if we set the number of jumps to 2, that means that it can jump once and then jump again when it's in midair. But it has to detect that we're back on the ground to be able to jump again, right? And these parameters down here is what allows us to figure that out. Right now, there's a thing called what is ground, right? And it's saying that everything in this drop-down menu happens to be ground. What is actually happening here is that this object is shooting a little, no, it has a collider. We have a circle collider, and if it bumps into anything that belongs to any of these layers right here, it's going to consider that to be ground. This is one of the reasons that we had to add a collider before, so that when it bumps into things, we can detect and check to see what types of things it's bumping into. Right now, these list of objects here are considered layers, and you can see here that this particular object belongs to its own layer called default. And there's other options that we can have here that pre-exist, and we can add different layers if we wanted to. But right now the code is set so that if it bumps into anything again, it's going to consider that object to be ground, and it's going to reset the number of jumps that are available to it. We can change the number of jumps to 1 so that if the player jumps in the air, it can only go again. It can only jump once, but not go again. We can change this number to 3. Jump, jump. Ooh, jump, jump. Oh, I changed the secondary height, so it's tough to see when we do the secondary jump. 1, 2, 3. Great. Last thing that we want to look at is this player needs to know when it is off the ground or not. So if this player happens to be off the ground and I let go, I will not be able to jump until I hit the ground. So I'm going to spam the space bar as soon as I release. And I'm not able to jump until I am touching the ground. Why? Because we have some detection points that are shooting from this particular player. You'll notice that when I press this triangle here, that there's some other objects that look like they're sort of tabbed over from the player movement object. These objects actually belong to the player movement object, and they're considered child objects of the parent player movement. So they belong to the same object and are nested in the parent object that is player movement. And these other objects are, right now, they're called left detect and right detect. If I move over here, you'll notice that there's a little center of this transform right here. If I look at this one, there's another one over here. And the point of these guys are, for this particular character, is looking at the edges of this character. And if they're if they hit a certain thing, then we might be detecting running into an enemy or we're off the ground, and this will change the way that it behaves based on the code. Great. Let's go to the next step. So enemy or NPC movement. Let's do target chaser. So target chaser is an interesting one because this is meant for a top-down scenario. So let's say that you're playing something like Galaga and your ship moves to a certain spot that's close to this chaser. It's already going to have a target, which happens to be your ship, and if you get close to it, it's going to move after you. So let's find this object in Unity. I believe it's over on the left side. Yeah, so target chaser is this red one over here, and there's a rotation chaser as well. So if I use the top-down object, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go select the top-down movement, and I'm going to tell my camera to target the top-down object. So it's going to follow my top-down object. So I just selected my main camera, and you can notice that there's a camera controller script attached to it. This is a script that we wrote, and it has a target field. And right now it's linked to bank. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and drag top-down movement from here, click and drag while I'm holding it into the target field. Now, when I hit play, the script is meant to say that, oh, I'm targeting the top-down movement object. Wherever the object is moving, the camera is going to follow as well. So you'll notice that once I start moving my top-down object, the camera is following it. Now, what we're going to examine before I start moving even closer is looking at this red target chaser. The red target chaser has some components attached to it. The rigid body, of course, but it also has a target chaser script, which has an aggro distance, a stopping distance, and minimum distance. Right now, it's looking at the top-down movement object, which is this guy, to say that when the top-down movement object gets close to the chaser, then it's going to, from a distance of 5, then it's going to start chasing this guy. And the aggro distance is 5 units. If we look at the scene, the 1 unit is the distance between this node and this node. So if I start getting closer to it, right now there's obviously more than 5. It's close to 5, but it's not, right? And if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I move into somewhere around here, then we would expect the target chaser to start moving towards us. So let's try that. You can see now it's moving towards me as I move around the scene. Oh, now the rotator chaser is also following me too. It has a similar script in that it has an aggro distance and a movement speed. Both of them are going after me. Cool. One last thing that we want to look at is, of course, the top-down point motor has a speed parameter. It's just like the one that we attached to the player. And let's look at the rotator chaser. So rotator chaser, it has an aggro distance, stopping distance, rotation speed as well. Cool. Couple more things. Let's look at platform chaser and platform controller. So if we go back to Unity, let's move the camera to follow the platformer movement. So I'm going to drag the platformer movement into the target space. And let's hit play. So the camera should now just slew over to the platformer. And what we want to look at is the patroller first. Okay, so I'm going to select a patroller. Oh, this is the point patroller. So cool. Once I select the point patroller, you notice that it is moving between these 4 dots. And these dots are actually just objects in the scene. This is an empty object. I'm selecting P1, and it's referring to this guy here. P1 doesn't have a sprite renderer, doesn't have a rigid body, doesn't need any of those things. It only needs to know its transform, which is its position, rotation, and scale. And the most important part of it is its position in space. And so what happens with this point patroller is that the point patroller has a script here, point patroller. And if you hit this little triangle next to it, it has a drop down that shows you that it's taking in 4 elements. And P1 happens to be one of them. It's the first one here, and then the other ones are the other points. If I look at P2, it's this, where's P2? P2 is this guy here, P3 is here, and P4 is there. So if you look at the platform patroller, it's programmed to move through these 4 points in space. Every time it gets close, it's going to select the next point and then move through it. You'll see this checkbox that says loop. If we check this checkbox, then rather than going forwards and then backwards through this list of points, it's just going to go in one direction and continuously move in one direction. So we should see this guy, move around in this circle now. If we uncheck it, then after it reaches the last one, it's going to move backwards. There it goes. I hope this starts to make sense. I wrote these scripts to be somewhat intuitive, and so that you can focus on the design portions of it. And we're going to dive more into the nitty-gritty on how this actually happens in the code. Great. So let's go look at one of these regular patrollers, and they're kind of similar to these point patrollers, but they don't actually have built-in waypoints, right? So let's select one of these guys. This guy is an AI platform patrol. And what's nitty-gritty about this one, it has the AI point patrol script with a direction that it starts out with, and then how long it waits when it gets to an edge, 1 second, and then it moves to the next. If I change this to be 0 time, we should see this thing just bounce and then bounce. If I change this wait time to 3 seconds, it's going to do the thing that we think it's going to do, wait 3 seconds and then move back the other way. So what's cool about this thing is that it uses the same detection code that our player does. And you can see this here in the ground detection options. If I select the left, this guy has 2 objects associated with it. And you can see it here, left detect is this point here, and then right detect. And if these objects bump into what it considers to be a wall or an edge, like here for this top patroller, it'll stop its movement and move back the other way. Okay. I think that's it for all of them. Let's go back and look at my list. Platform patroller. Yep. Let's say that you want to implement these in your own scenes. This is pretty easy, right? What you could do is just copy this one object and then change the sprite. So right now we have this patroller, right? And it's right now has the Discord icon. Let's just change that. What do? I go to the sprite renderer of this object. Let's get out of play. Select this guy, go to sprite, and then change it to maybe this dude. Idle dude 0. Dude idle 0. There he is. So there's the patroller. Right now there's a label of this, and we can get rid of the label by going to canvas and either deleting the canvas object. We'll talk about canvas later. That's how you show UI things. Or you can just deactivate it by unchecking this box here. There. Now let's go to here. And since we originally had the circle down here, right? And right now when I change the sprite, why is this feet right there? Remember one of my earlier videos when I talked about pivot points? The default pivot point for dude idle 0 is at its feet. And in this case, the the collider is not appropriately put. So how do we fix that? So we go to select the object, move down to the circle collider area, and what we can do is change the offset value in the y-axis. And so I would just move this to be a little bit higher. Now we're in the right zone here. And then the last two things is we want to adjust the left detect and the right detect. So we can select this, and we want to move this up so it's closer to where its feet is. Something like that. And move this one up. Move it over like this. We want to make sure that we change these detection points because your character, this enemy is going to move in an odd way. It's going to seem like they're just stuck, or it's going to seem like it's floating. So so this one is kind of moving back and forth, and this is because I believe the position of these detection points is a little bit off. So I'll go back here, and let's just examine where that collider is. The collider seems pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust where this left detect and right detect are. So I'm going to raise it up just a tad. And let's see if that works. That's interesting. I didn't test this out before I made this video. So let's see. What am I doing wrong? Left detect transform, right detect transform. It should be just continuously moving along this plane. Oh, that's weird. The right detect and the left detect just moved to the center of my character. I don't want that. Did I do this wrong? Left detect. Okay. Okay, so I just moved it up a little bit higher, and that solved the problem. So push your left detect and the right detect a little bit higher, and your enemy should be scooting in that way. Facing, we're going to talk about facing in, this refers to some of the animation stuff. And so we're going to come back to that in a little bit. And yeah, so that'll be next week that we swap the facing of our characters. Let's say that we just want to make a duplicate of this. So let's say that we have a top-down ship, and this will probably be the end of our video. Let's go and create a new object, and let's go create empty, and I'm gonna make this. Oh, it created in a weird spot, so I'm just gonna select main camera, go to create empty. There it is, and then we'll say like this is gonna be new character. Just name it new character. And I am going to add a sprite. So let's go add component, sprite editor, a sprite renderer, and then we're going to select one from our assets folder. Let's say it's going to be one of these things. Let's see. This could be a way to search for things, or we can go to assets, sprites. Let's pick space. Let's pick a sprite that I made. Is this in here? Yeah. So let's say it's going to be mothership, and we go to new character, drag in mothership into the sprite. There it is. Then a few things that we said that we need to have. We definitely need to have a rigid body 2D. It's not going to have any gravity scale to it. And I am going to add a box collider. So I'll type in box collider 2D and that's a good shape for it. So what are the other components that we need? This is going to be like a spacey type of thing. So I'm going to go and select the top down, and I need to put in a player input controller and a top down motor. So I'll go over here and hit add component and type in player input controller and then add top down motor. Let's see if that works. It has a default movement speed of 10. If I hit play and then try to move my ship around, there it is. So it's moving around. So you can see that it's sort of banging around and spinning. One thing that we can do is, I think I mentioned in a previous video, is that if I don't want my sprite to be rotating, no matter if it hits something, I'll go to its rigid body. I'm in my new characters inspector, go to rigid body, and under constraints, I'll hit this triangle and then hit the freeze rotation Z axis. Now, when it hits something and maybe it hits it in a sort of askew way, my ship will not rotate. So there it is. Great. That's it. I'm going to post another video talking about how to maybe implement your own movement scripts and how you might do that inside C#. These are for people that are interested in learning to code within C#, and maybe you're familiar with things like C++ or Java. It's really closely related to Java, so if you have some program experience, I suggest you look at this video. You'll hopefully learn some things and then be able to implement your own scripting. Cool. I'll talk to you guys later.